With a view to helping people understand the process and develop a framework for how to develop nudges, my group here at the Rotman School of Management and I developed a guide that we call the Practitioner's Guide to Nudging. A lot of the content from this guide is actually going to be part of the reading material for this class. And in fact, today you'll see a link in your materials to a PDF version of this guide as well. What we do in the guide is to identify a simple 4-stage process of how to go about designing a nudge. The 4 stages are mapping the context, mapping the decision, selecting a nudge, identifying a specific lever that you're going to use to implement the nudge, and then finally a process of designing and iterating on that nudge. So let's start off with the process of mapping a decision context. What does it mean to map a context? It means the following thing. When we think about an outcome such as saving more for retirement or leading a healthier lifestyle, there are several stages that the consumer goes through in order to actually make a sequence of decisions that result in that final outcome. Mapping exactly what that sequence of decisions looks like and what their key considerations are when they make those decisions is perhaps one of the most important things to do when we start working on a nudging strategy. As part of the PDF version of the guide I just talked about, an appendix in that guide gives you a simple form with a checklist for the kinds of things you need to make notes on when you audit that decision-making process. What are the properties of the decision to be made itself? Is it a simple binary choice, yes, no? Or are there multiple stages in that decision? Are there many options from which the person needs to choose, or are there simply 2? Are there simple choices, or do people need to make judgments on a continuous scale? For example, a simple choice would be, do I choose fund A versus fund B? A more complex judgment would be, how many dollars should I put into my retirement account each month, and should that number change as a function of time? The other set of factors to look at include the information that people need and use in making that decision. How is the information presented to them? Is it too much? Is it too little? In what medium do they get the information? Is it in text? Is it online? Or does it come through them through some kind of other channel? Is it textual information or is it visual information? And is the information framed in a particular manner versus a different manner? It's important to audit all of those things. What is the mindset of the individual when they actually make that decision? Are they implementation focused or are they in a planning focus? Are they myopic or are they employing a long-term window? Where do they make the choice? Is it made in a store where they have time constraints? Or are they making the choice at home, sitting alone in the comfort of their living room? Is it a choice that is made in the presence of somebody else? Or is it a choice that they make independently? And finally, again, environmental and social factors need to be audited and documented. Is the decision going to be publicly visible? Or is it something that the person can make on their own and nobody else would know about their choice? Is it a product category which is conspicuously consumed? Or is it something that is silent and hidden? Is the choice made in a group setting? Is it made in an individual setting? These and other factors are part of this checklist and are always a great place to start when you design a nudge because it gives you all the information that you need to know when you start thinking through what the right intervention should be. Now, here's an example of a process map for a decision on retirement savings. And what you'll see we've done here is we've identified a number of different stages that fall into 3 different brackets of the decision-making process. Recognizing the importance of retirement savings is the first stage in the process. Without people realizing that this is something they need to attend to, the rest of the stages simply don't matter. There are other stages. For example, the fact that you actually go in and need to open a retirement account, be it a 401k account in the United States or a RRSP in Canada or whatever the equivalent account is in your home country. And finally, there are stages that have to do with monitoring the account on an ongoing basis, making adjustments, making sure that your portfolio is rebalanced over time, and so on and so forth. So this chart represents the simple stages that people go through in terms of making that particular decision. Now, once you've got the chart and once you start thinking about what the right kind of nudge should be to affect these different stages in the decision-making process, There are 4 kinds of questions that you need to ask yourself. And in fact, these questions are again highlighted in the guide that I just talked about. The first question is perhaps the most critical question. Is the decision maker aware of the correct decision, and are they simply unable to execute it, or do they not even know what the right choice is? Think of a simple example. Think about retirement savings. We've talked about the fact that everybody knows they need to save more, but they just don't get down to doing it. We've got awareness, people know what they need to do, but they simply fail on the execution. But there might be other domains where people simply don't know what to do. Think about healthy eating. Let's say part of the healthy eating program involves a gluten-free diet. Unless the consumer has the right education to actually figure out that that's what's best for them, they would never even contemplate going towards a gluten-free diet. So that's an important question. Is the individual aware, or do you need to make them aware? Do you need to steer them towards a particular outcome? Second question, is the individual motivated to impose a nudge on themselves? Think about the Save More Tomorrow program. If I go and tell somebody, here's a program where you can trick yourself into saving more, it's going to work for people who know they have a self-control problem. Or stick.com, we talked about this, the website that helps you achieve your goals. It's going to help people who know that they have a self-control problem. If people have a self-control problem, they're aware of it, and they're motivated to solve it, then in fact you can employ certain kinds of nudges. If in fact they don't even have the motivation, then you're talking about a completely different set of strategies. Cognition is the third question. Should I give the person more information? Are they actually making a poor choice because they're deficient in information? Or is in fact the provision of additional information or cognition going to hurt them? Is cognition going to help, or is it going to hurt? If they already have a lot of information and the error arises because they can't process too much information, then in fact you want to cut down and simplify. On the other hand, if they don't have enough information, then you want to provide them with information. And then finally, another important question, are people making the right choice or the wrong choice because of inertia, laziness, or is something else getting in the way? In other words, do I need to provoke and excite people or nudge them into doing something, or do I want to nudge them into not doing the opposite thing? And again, on the face of it, these seem like complementary processes, but from a nudging perspective, they represent completely different psychologies and therefore completely different interventions that you would do to address those psychologies. Now, after having answered these 4 questions, there is one other precise thing you could do by going back to the map that we talked about a little bit earlier, and that is to identify bottlenecks in the process. If you have a map with 6 stages or 6 boxes, which is the box at which there is the greatest attrition or drop-off that happens? In other words, how many people that are in stage 1 actually go to stage 2? How many people that express interest or motivation or recognition that they need to save more actually go out and open a bank account? How many of those actually collect the information needed to figure out exactly what they need to invest in, and so on and so forth, right? So if you actually map that out in your chart, you can identify the big bottlenecks. Where are the bottlenecks? The bottlenecks happen at those stages where you have the highest attrition rates. Now, what actually causes these bottlenecks? You need to think through the underlying psychological principles that cause bottlenecks. For example, what's the biggest bottleneck at the need recognition stage? Why do so few people, as a percent, actually begin to feel the need to plan for their retirement? Well, part of it is a simple psychological bias, the distance bias. It's too far away. I'm 30 years away from retirement. My children are little. I have many other needs today. Why should I focus on retirement? So any strategy that overcomes the perceived distance between today and the retirement is going to help here. Allocation. Why do people trip up trying to make an optimal allocation of funds into their retirement accounts? Perhaps because they don't know how to choose. And here, a simple intervention that gives people a tool or a technique to help them choose between different options would be the best nudge. Selecting funds. How do people decide which of many funds to choose? Perhaps the bottleneck there is that there are just too many options. And so this choice overload that we talked about earlier trips people up. They choose to not choose, And so they have an account, but they actually don't put anything in it. So at each stage, if you think through what the attrition rates are and try and identify exactly what you could do to fix those particular sets of attrition, you have now identified for yourself at the end of this process a series of potential interventions or potential nudges that you could implement in clearing the flow from the left part of the chart to the right.